morning, guys. Hopefully you guys have had a good week. I spent most of this week kind of reminiscing on some different things. We're getting ready to start planning some of the different holidays, and my wife and I started putting away some holiday decorations, and it got me thinking about the holidays a little bit. A couple years ago, I got to spend Thanksgiving with my dad in Baltimore, and it was this really unique experience. My wife and I had never been to my dad's new house. He had just built this house, and we had wanted to go see him before our son was born, and we could go out there. And when I'm out there for Thanksgiving, my dad tells me that he was going to rent some equipment like a scissor lift or whatever to hang all of his Christmas lights, but you needed a license for that, and he decided that wasn't worth it. So as his only son, I drew the short straw, and I was going to climb the roof and hang the Christmas lights. And I mean, what do you do as a kid, right? I don't want my dad on the roof, and so I'm like, okay, I guess I'm hanging Christmas lights. And so before Thanksgiving dinner, I go up, and he holds the ladder, and pretty soon I find myself on top of his steeple-style roof, laying flat as I can, and kind of spread out, trying to take as much surface area as I can, hanging off the edge, trying to clip in the easy up clip so that next year it'll be easy for him, before even trying to do the lights. And it's at this moment, fully spread out and, I don't know, maybe up to my thighs off the roof, trying to hold myself together. I'm not scared of heights, but not until you're about to fall do you decide if you're scared of heights or not. So on the ground, I'm not scared of heights. About to fall, I get a little bit on the edge. And it's at this point that I think to myself, man, how did I get here? I'm on vacation. It's supposed to be easy. How do I find myself possibly going to the hospital very shortly if I fall? You guys ever find yourself in those situations? You just sit there and you wonder, how in the world did I get here? Right? You know what's funny is we don't realize how unstable our situation tends to be until we're in the middle of it. Right? When my dad said, hey, just go up there and hang some Christmas lights, I didn't think too much of it. I've hung a million Christmas lights in my life, whatever, no big deal. And then up there, I start to think to myself, maybe this wasn't the best move. Maybe falling off the roof just before Thanksgiving dinner is not the best way to spend the holidays. So, needless to say, I didn't put up the Christmas lights. I went down. I was not about to do that. So I came down, and when I left, my dad hired a company to do it so that he wouldn't have to do it. I'm like, why did we not start with this? But that's okay. The point is, sometimes we find ourselves in situations where we just wonder how we got there. And maybe it's not Christmas lights. Maybe it's a situation in our life. Maybe our life feels like it's spiraled out of control. In Matthew chapter 7, Jesus lays out really two ways that we can live our life. Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 through 27. They're not going to be behind me, so I'll read them. It says, this is Jesus speaking. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on a rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because it was founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell. And great was the fall of it. See, Jesus is outlining these two ways to live. He's wrapping up what is known as the Sermon on the Mount. It's Matthew chapter 5 through 7. And he says, you can do all of the things that I've instructed you, and you can build your house on solid rock. Or you can live how you're normally living now, when we're left to our own devices. And this is a wild time. I mean, Peter cuts off a guy's ear for getting too close to Jesus. Like, this is a wild time, guys. And Jesus says, if you want to build your house on something solid, that will withstand all of the crazy situations that come in life, then you got to do these things. You see, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount is this 180 on how to live life. It's totally opposite of what they have done for years and years and years, for generations, right? Jesus says, instead of holding on to your anger, let it go. Forgive people. Learn to be a little bit happier, a little bit more peaceful. He says, instead of watching other people fail, look out for one another. He says, when people wrong you, don't attack them, forgive them. It's totally contrary to the rest of the world at the time. And so I got to ask myself, I got to ask all of you, do you find yourself in a situation where you wonder, man, how in the world am I here? I thought I built my house on solid rock. I want to build my house on solid rock. I mean, everybody would rather the house stand. It's like the story of the 3 little pigs. Everybody wants the brick house that the wolf can't blow down, right? But the truth is, when we build our house on a rock, it's not as one and done as it sounds. When you build a house, you have a house that stands. That's a physical thing, and it's there. When we orient our life on solid rock or on sand, it's an everyday choice. Every situation we find ourselves in. Because the one promise that we get from Jesus in Matthew 7 is that the storms will come. No matter how you build your house, no matter how we found our life, the storms will come. And for many of us sitting here today, some storms have already come. For those of you who haven't got the storm yet, be prepared. It's coming. See? He knows. But here's the thing. This brings us back to Paul. Because as we've been journeying through this letter that Paul has written to the church in Philippi, Paul has come to this understanding, this end of his letter, and this is what he's trying to express. Hey, build your house on solid rock. The same thing that Jesus tried to express. Philippians 4, chapter 1, Paul starts with this. He says, "Therefore, my brothers, whom I love and long for, my joy and crown, stand firm thus in the Lord, my beloved." Paul loves this church. And Paul's a missionary who built up a lot of churches, and he loves every church, and he's trying to spread the gospel. This is true. But Paul loves this church. This is the first church that believed in Paul. When Paul had a conversion experience and he felt Jesus call him in the most amazing, dramatic way that Jesus can call people, maybe not the most dramatic, but it was a dramatic way that he called Paul on the road to Damascus. Paul had gone through some training. He had learned the ways of Jesus and the teachings of Jesus, and he's getting ready for ministry, and nobody wants to deal with him, which, I mean, in fairness, Paul had a reputation for killing Christians, so it's not really the kind of guy you want to lead your church as a Christian. That seems kind of counterintuitive. But the church in Philippi said, you know what, we're going to support you. Financially, with love, unconditionally, they supported Paul. And so Paul deeply loves this church, and as he ends this letter, which is probably his last letter to them. He's in Rome, he's in prison, he's on house arrest, he doesn't know if he's coming out. We don't have another letter to the church of Philippi. And so he's got to be thinking this has got to be the last letter. This might be the last letter. This might be the end. And he wants them to understand, to stand firm in the Lord, to build their house on solid rock. Because there's already storms in the church of Philippi. Because if they are going to survive as a church, man, they got to be able to weather these storms. So Paul urges us to build our house on solid rock. And he gives us some simple but not easy instructions on how to build our house on solid rock. And I say simple but not easy because they're not complex, but man, is it hard to do some of these things. Man, is it hard to change our life and our way of thinking about life. The first thing we see is that Paul says to build our house on solid rock, or we build our house on solid rock by living in peace. In verse 2, Paul says, I entreat Euodia and I entreat... Man, I worked really hard this week to say this, and now I feel like it's just not there. We're going to go Syntyche. That's where we're going to go with, guys. I am so sorry. I worked really hard on that this week, and now it's just gone. I entreat these two ladies to you to agree in the Lord. Can you imagine being called out by name by Paul? Like, I don't know how big of a deal this was back then. I assume it was still a really big deal because if you got a letter from Paul as a church, that's what you read in your meeting. That was your scripture teaching for the day, is what Paul was teaching to you. And you gathered everybody, and there was this big deal. I can't imagine the feeling. Everybody's gathered together, and somebody's like, I got a letter from Paul. And he opens it up on stage, and it's like, guys, you're called out by name. That's embarrassing. I'm just saying. And borderline some terrible punishment. But Paul does this out of love because he understands that we need to live in peace with one another. These ladies who had done good work, if you look into verse 3, it says, yes, I ask you also, true companion, help these women who have labored side by side with me in the gospel together with Clement and the rest of my fellow workers whose names are in the book of life. These are strong Christian ladies who have worked really hard in the church. And now they've got some sort of drama going on the side. But it's interesting because Paul is saying that by being rooted in Christ, we can live a different life than we're used to. We don't have to be subject to the drama, to the infighting, to the things of this world, whatever is going on. It doesn't mention specifically their issue in the church or what's going on. But Paul makes it very clear, hey, it's got to stop. And then in verse 3, when he talks about a true companion, believers in the church, he's saying, hey, help these people out. Because it's you and I. I know too often, it's very easy to see somebody struggling and think, I don't really want to get involved with somebody's personal drama, right? Or on the other side of that, it's you see somebody struggling with the same personal drama again and again and again, and you're just like, I'm going to keep my distance on that one. But Paul wants us to live in peace. Paul knows that we need to live in peace with one another. And he asks us to help each other as we strive for this. When I was younger, I had a buddy. He was one of my best friends, and he's still a very good friend to me today. But we were climbing trees, because that's what young boys do. And I got a phone call that my mom needed me, and I had to go home. And so he's in this tree, and I'm like, hey, I got to go. And he's like, well, I don't want to jump because it's high, and we're back to the whole heights thing. So I did what any 8th grade boy would do, and I pushed him out of the tree. And then I did what any best friend would do, and I left him on the ground. Yes. Guys, I've come a long way since I was a kid. Just don't climb trees with me. But anyway, so I had to go because I didn't want to leave him, but I feared whatever punishment I would get from not getting back to my mom in time, then whatever happened with him. And so I texted him later because I'm a good friend, right? I'm an okay friend. And I tried to figure out what's going on, and he didn't answer it. And then he left me on red. And so like on the phone, it says that he saw my message, but he didn't respond. And I don't know if you guys are anything like me, but now I'm mad. Right? Because I have every right to be mad. No. but I'm mad because I think he's mad at me, and now I'm working up conversations in my head about why I should be mad at him. Like, at least I would have answered the text, At least I would have done whatever. And so now I'm mad, and out of spite, I'm not going to answer him even if he did text me back. You guys been here? Yeah. It's funny how our brains work sometimes. We go all weekend, we don't talk. Monday comes around, and he comes up to me like, no big deal. He's like, hey, how's it going? I'm like, I'm going to tell you how it's going. You want to know how it's going? Because I'm fuming. Because I've worked all weekend in my head with these conversations that we didn't have. Come to find out, when I pushed him out of the tree, he broke his arm. Still has trouble getting through airplane security. And he spent the weekend in the hospital. And so when he came to me on Monday, totally nonchalant, just totally happy, he was like, oh, hey, my mom took my phone because I was in the hospital. I was like, what are you in the hospital for? And pins and plates and whatever they do to fix the broken arm. And I realized then that it is not conducive to live in anger for anything. Because too often when we rely on what we know in this life, it leads us to this place of unsettledness, of holding on to anger and resentment and even conversations that didn't actually happen, where I just made it sound worse. Because, in all honesty, I had no reason to be upset. I pushed my best friend out of a tree, and he had this life-altering broken arm situation, and I left him on the ground. I think the real miracle is we're still friends. But that's okay. In fairness, he hit me with a car later, but that's a story for another time. Just saying. We'll get there. It'll be an illustration, don't you worry. But see, what's unique about us as believers is that Christ frees us to operate differently in our relationships. See, because of the forgiveness that God gave us, we can then give forgiveness to others. We can stand in that gap, and no matter how awkward those conversations are, no matter how weird or how much we don't want to have those conversations, we can forgive other people in our life. And guys, I know that sometimes it's harder than others. That forgiving a friend is a little bit different than forgiving a loved one or a significant other or whatever the case may be. But we're called to live in peace with one another. And we're called to forgive because Jesus forgave us. The second thing that we see is that by building our rock, or we learn to build our house on solid rock by pursuing unity. And this isn't just unity in relationships, it's unity in all of our life. If you look at verse 4 and 5, Philippians chapter 4, it says this, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again I will say, rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand." Living in peace and living in unity are similar. However, living in unity is a unity of our entire life. And I don't know where each and every one of us stands today, but I'm willing to bet that there's at least one area of our life that's not in unity with what God has for us. One thing that we're hanging on to. See, if you look back at verse 3, Paul says, "Yes, I ask you also, true companion, help these women who have labored side by side with me for the gospel, in the gospel, together with Clement and the rest of my fellow workers whose names are in the book of life." Paul reiterates the things that bind us together, the experiences that we've shared, the mission of God that we serve together. Paul's saying, hey, focus on these things and not on what drives us apart. Because if we don't focus on the things that bind us together, then we focus on the things that drive us apart. And those are way too easy to let into the church, into our personal relationships, into everything that we have going on. When I was a little younger, I had the opportunity to be a youth pastor for a long time. And one of my main responsibilities, actually my main responsibility, was to take a bunch of junior high and high schoolers down to Mexico for a week during spring break. And actually the responsibility wasn't to take them, it was to bring them all back. That was really the tricky part of that. I love those trips. It was an honor to serve those trips. And without fail, I could tell that certain things would always happen on those trips. There were certain things that you just knew, like at some point this was going to happen. Like I would take junior hires, but I knew that if I took a sixth grader, at some point that sixth grader was probably going to break down on me. And I'd have to have this heart-to-heart, like, hey, now it's the time to step up. This is what we have to do. And it wasn't a bad thing. It was just like you knew this was going to happen. This was taking a bunch of junior high and high schoolers who lived a pretty good life. Most of them didn't work. Most of them didn't have extra things they had to do. They just had to go to school and hang out with their friends. And I stuck them on the ground in the dirt for a week with no shower and up at 5 o'clock in the morning, bed at midnight, hard labor all day for the gospel. It was good. It was good for them, but I knew that at some point that would happen. I also knew that at some point friends would fight. You don't spend that much time together doing hard things together and not start to get a little nitpicky at one another. The sleeping on the ground arguably didn't help either. But one time, I had two guys who were best friends. They did everything together. They were on the same clubs together. They went to school together. They hung out together. Like they were best friends. And at some point on this trip, they started to fight with one another. It started small, like, hey, move your stuff, it's on my stuff, or hey, I don't want to sit next to you right now, or whatever the case might have been. But pretty soon it started to escalate. Pretty soon I couldn't put them in the same van because they were fighting with one another. Now, in all honesty, I had this policy that I inherited as youth pastor, and if you were caught arguing or fighting, you had to pick either pain, gross, or embarrassing. And then the team would pick whatever you wanted in that category, and that would be your punishment, and then it would be done. But I didn't like to go that far, and so I pulled them both aside, and I said, hey, what is going on? And I reiterated to them all of the things that were true of their friendship. They've been friends for over a decade. They did everything together. They practically lived at one another's house. They had done all of this work together down here in Mexico. They had built this house together. They had been with the kids. They had stood side by side through so many things. They were there when each other got baptized. They were there in their hard times back home. And now they were going to throw it all away for a few moments of anger. And after listing all these things, after having this moment with them, it became very clear that they didn't even know why they were fighting. They didn't know why one thing had led to another that had escalated into something else. They didn't understand why they weren't living in unity together. They just focused on the negative too many times. Luckily, none of us here in this room were called out in the Bible. Right? Luckily, none of us had to bear that being called out for our disunity. But it could have been us. If we were around back then, I guarantee that we have some disunity in us. That we have some areas that we struggle with from time to time. And I don't want to dive this morning into all of our problems. I don't want to turn this into a Dr. Phil type thing. But I will give you this piece of advice. That if we are to live in unity, Forgiveness is the best weapon against a root of bitterness in our soul. That sounds like a fortune cookie, but it's true. If we want to fight this seed of disunity, this bitterness that takes root in our soul, which is what the Bible would call it, then forgiveness is our best weapon. I can't tell you how many times I've seen friendships crumble over my years as a youth pastor because of little things where if one person had just stepped up and said, I'm sorry I did that, they would have been great friends for the rest of their life. But too many times we focus on the negative. We focus on all these other things, and unity is not our goal. Our goal might be to follow Christ. Our goal might be to do well in life or whatever the case may be, but unity becomes not our goal, and we don't want to step up and be the one to ask for forgiveness. Right? No one wants to admit they're wrong. It's universal in life. But asking for forgiveness opens that conversation, and it's the best weapon to bring us back into unity. The last thing that Paul sees, or Paul teaches us, is that we build our house on solid rock by focusing on the good things. Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, Paul says this, "Finally, my brothers." By the way, this is like the fourth time that Paul says finally. Chapter 8, or verse 8, "Finally, my brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things." And Paul challenges us not to focus on the negative things, of which there are plenty of negative things. Paul has plenty of negative things in his life. He's on house arrest in Rome. He's been beaten. He's been stoned. He's been left for dead. He's been chased out of towns. Paul had a whole 180. He lost all of his friends when he decided to be a Christian. Like, there are plenty of negative things going on here. And Paul says, don't worry about all those. Instead, focus on all these good things in life. What's funny is there is a rhetoricalness to Paul's statements at the end there. The second half of verse 8 says, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. And it's funny because it's a rhetoricalness, because in the way that it's written, it's almost like if there is anything of, or if there is any excellence, which there is always something of excellence. If there's anything worthy of praise, which there is always something worthy of praise, then think about those things. Paul's saying focus on the good things and not the bad. When my wife and I got married, we developed this game that I like to play, and she gets frustrated with me sometimes, but I call it the blessings game. See, whenever we find ourselves stuck in the negative or worrying about some of the bad things going on, because there's stuff that happens in life. There's plenty of bad things that happen in life. Then we decide to play this game. And the game is pretty easy. And basically all you have to do is you just start listing all the blessings that you have in this life. So my wife and I would play, and we'd say things like, we have a place to live. Good job. Beautiful baby boy. We have our parents around for us. We have good friends. We have family. We have friends that are family. Got a car that's paid off. That's nice. And so on and so forth. And we just list all these blessings, because I guarantee you there's more blessings than negatives. The problem is those few negatives in our lives, they stand out. They seem bold, and it makes us forget the blessings that God has given us. So in just a few minutes, we would take this time to play this game, and in 5 minutes, our whole perspective on the day changes. The last time we played this game was maybe a month before Levi was born, our son was born. Driving down the road, getting ready to move. We knew we were coming out here. We were in the midst of all that, and Melinda was on maternity leave, and rock just shatters our back window. Just out of nowhere, driving on the freeway, just shatters. Melinda screams because it's a loud noise, and that's what happens sometimes. And we pull over, make sure it's all good, and then it just becomes this, it became this idea of, man, why this? Why now? I got to deal with this. I got all these other things going on, and pretty soon we're playing the opposite of the blessing game, right? Because we're playing, I got to pay for the window. I got all these moving expenses. I got this to do, and I'm not even working right now, and Melinda's not working right now, and we got a baby, and what are we going to do about the car seat? Oh my goodness, thank goodness the car seat wasn't in there, and it doesn't have broken glass. You got to pay to get the car cleaned. What if they don't clean it right? And pretty soon, we quickly focus on the negative if we don't play the blessing game. You guys been there? You get stuck, caught up in the negative things in life because they're easier, they're more noticeable. Paul says, don't even think about those. Don't worry about those. Instead, fix your mind on the good things in life. Again, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, anything worthy of praise, think about these things. What's neat is that these aren't exactly just Christian values that Paul is talking about here. These are everyday good things to focus on, right? When somebody does the right thing, like something honorable, holds a door for somebody, lets you go first, or whatever the case may be, or steps up when they made a mistake instead of you getting yelled at work, those kind of things. Focus on the little good things that happen, because there's more little good things than bad things. I don't know how things are going. I don't know how each and every one of our lives is. You might feel like you don't have very many blessings. I get that. That your week might be hard, or maybe it's been a really long month, a couple of weeks stacked together, right? Maybe it just feels lousy right now. I guarantee you there are at least a few blessings in your life. The fact that we're sitting in air conditioning is one. Just saying. It's hot out here, guys. Thank you. Take a few moments today and play the blessing game. Think about your blessings and not your negatives. Focus on the good things. This is how we stand firm. This is how we build our house on solid rock, the same way Jesus asked us. Again, knowing that we build this house daily with every decision, every situation that we find ourselves in. That by living in peace, by pursuing unity, and by focusing on the good things, that we can build our house on something solid, something that will withstand all of the storms. When I moved out here, I thought I knew what a storm was. California doesn't have storms, guys. Just so you know. No, when Melinda and I moved out here, we have the privilege now of watching the storm roll in. You see the lightning far off, and you know you have 20 or 30 minutes before the rain comes. And when the rain comes, it's not like a little drizzle. Where I'm from, it would drizzle for like 4 or 5 hours, and here it drizzles for like 20 minutes, and everything is flooded for a moment. Think about those storms, how quickly they appear in our lives, how quickly our situation can change if we don't take root the way that we should, if we aren't founded on solid rock. I always thought the illustration was weird because in California, like I said, the storms come in slow, and it doesn't seem like, it's not or it's not fast or random or any of these kind of things where you get caught off guard. So I thought, well, obviously you want your house on solid rock, but if you see the storm coming, then you just move to higher ground. That's easy life, right? But out here I've realized that storms often, they'll sneak up on you. You can go to dinner and be in a restaurant, totally sunny outside, and come out and it is pouring rain and you can't get to your car. Thank you. This is what I'm saying. Unfortunately, that's how fast our situations can turn. We can think, oh man, I'm planted, I'm good. I went to church on Sunday, I went to midweek. It's a plug, we have Wednesday nights, just saying. Went to midweek, it was great. I do an adult Bible study in the morning. But all of a sudden you find yourself, oh man, I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's a hurt habit or hang up, as they would say in Celebrate Recovery, or I don't know if it's what it is that throws us off. But oftentimes, if we are not focused on where we are, we will quickly find ourselves on the opposite. So this week, I want to challenge us to focus on our positives, to build our house on solid rock daily. Not just a solid house and we just decide, I did that, that's good, but a daily situational update where we focus on the good things, where we live in peace, and where we strive to pursue unity. As I invite the worship team to come back up, would you guys pray with me, please? Heavenly Father, Lord, we are amazed by what you do for us. Lord, the wisdom that you imparted to us so long ago that stands so true to us today. Lord, it's amazing to me that when left to our own devices, we tend to make a mess of our life. Lord, in little bits or in big bits, it's still a mess. I pray this week that you help us to focus on the good things. Lord, help us to pursue you and then from there grow. Lord, help us to count the blessings that you've given us and not the hardships that the devil throws at us. Lord, help us to know that even when storms come, and Lord, as I've come to learn out here, they will come. Lord, help us to know that no matter what, we can stand firm in the truth that you've given us. We can live in peace with one another. We can pursue unity with ourselves and with others. Lord, as long as we stand firm in that truth and stand firm in you, that we will weather whatever storm comes our way. Be it health crisis, be it financial crisis, be it relational hardships, or no matter what that storm looks like, we will weather that with you. Lord, help us to lean on one another and help us to lean on you. In your name we pray.